Have you prepared for your marriage-based green card interview? If you haven't, now is a good time to watch this. I'm U.S. Immigration Attorney Sherifa Tharpe. I help clients to get their green card and status in the United States. I also come here on YouTube to give you great information that will empower you through your immigration journey. So when you're going into this interview, it's sort of an informal type of setting. So you're not going to necessarily be put on the stand, but you will be expected to tell the whole truth, and you will be sworn in once you get into the USCIS's officer's office. Now, when you check in, you're going to, of course, take all your required documentation. I suggest you give yourself time to review your notice, your interview notice, to see what sort of documentation you need to bring with you to check in and also to provide to the officer. Also, you want to make sure that if you have any information that's missing, that you take it there. That could help to reduce further delays. Now, get there early. Right now, due to COVID, they're letting individuals in no more than 15 minutes before, but when I meet my clients about 30 minutes ahead of the scheduled time. That allows us to touch base. It allows me to give them any last minute advice that they're going to need before we go into that office. Now, once you check in, you're going to have your ID and your interview notice. They're going to walk you through where you need to check in. They're going to send you to a waiting area. Sometimes they assign you a number, and they'll call your number when it's ready, or they'll call you by your name. Once the officer comes, hopefully you don't have to wait very long. They're going to lead you into their office, where usually there are chairs on one end, usually one for the immigrant, the spouse, and the attorney. There's usually a chair behind for the attorney or beside for the attorney, and then the officers on their side of the desk. They're first going to ask you to swear in, and once you've been sworn in to tell the truth, you are going to go over that application. The officer usually combs through your applications. They want to make sure everything is consistent and accurate. So know what's in your application. There is not the time to blank out on any information that you put there on the application. And also, it's a good time to keep in consideration any kinds of corrections that you may need to make if you haven't made those corrections on your application already. Then the officer usually dives into the questions, specific questions that's going to tell the officer how much you know each other and whether your marriage is real. Now, the kinds of questions you're going to be looking at are going to be routine questions about your relationship. How did you meet? Your family members, your wedding, your daily routine, even the appearance of your apartment. So you need to make sure that you develop a skill for being very detail oriented before that interview. If you haven't been paying attention to simple things like your spouse's eye color or which side of the bed they sleep on, now is the time to do that. I often tell my clients to make sure that they're in tune with each other. I'm not saying act like you're perfect, because no married couple is perfect. We all have our different quirks, but you should be in tune with each other, communicate with each other, reminisce about how you met, go over those great times, the best times you've had together. Go over family members. Go over the list of your family members, even though you may not know a family member of your spouse personally. It is something that the officer expects that your spouse would have talked to you about at some point. So I often say what helps with the preparation process is to just be in tune with your spouse. But here are some sample questions that you could expect. So the first is, and that's definitely not going to be unexpected, how did you meet? They're going to expect that the both of you are going to at least remember how you met. And there's always one spouse that does not remember those details. So it's always best to even remind each other of those facts, because I know there's always one spouse that's forgetful. And then the other is, when did you meet? So how did you meet? When did you meet? And then you can expect questions about the wedding. So how many people were at your wedding? Where did you get married? What setting did you get married? Why did you get married there? Then your daily life. Who wakes up first? What side of the bed does one spouse sleep on? And you could also expect, as the interview progresses, if the officer wants to keep digging, they will even ask more personal questions. So they'll ask questions like, do you plan to have children? How many children do you plan to have? So if that's not a conversation that you've had with your spouse, you should really make sure that you sit down and have these hard conversations, because if the more difficult the interview is the more that these types of personal questions can arise. Now, I don't want to scare you and imply that this interview is terrifying. Of course, it's nerve-wracking, but I've been in interviews where they have been a hoot. It has been great, a pleasant experience for my clients, and by the end of it, we were all laughing and they were walking out pleased with the outcome of their case. However, there are some harder situations. For example, if you're a newer couple and the officer sees certain circumstances that makes them suspicious about, how real or bona fide your marriage is, then you're definitely going to want to make sure that you and your spouse pay attention to details, each other's details, and also that you're aware of that going in, so you don't underestimate this process and you fully prepare, because in cases like that, it can get nerve-wracking, and at the end of the day, they if you get questions wrong, believe it or not, it can lead to a denial. If there's inconsistencies, it can lead to a denial. So that's how important this interview is for the process. Now, during the interview, here's one way that you could know whether, you always have to be on point, but whether you definitely need to be on alert, and that's if you're separated. I've been in interviews where they've stayed together and where they've been separated. Usually when they're separating you, that means they're looking to see how you answer the questions and whether you can answer them consistently. So the kinds of questions they're going to ask, it's going to depend, and keep in mind that the questions that I'm providing, there's no guarantee that those questions will be asked. It could be a number of different questions. So that's why it's very important to just speak with your spouse, make sure you are in tune with each other and that you're consistent. But they'll ask questions to see if you both will answer similarly. So for example, who cooks breakfast? Who wakes up first? What is the color of your curtains in your bedroom? What's the color of the couch? Do you want children? How many children do you have? What is your spouse's in-laws' name? What is your spouse's siblings? How many siblings do they have? So very important that you know the information like this, because it does get that detailed, and being separated and answering questions differently can be like a death sentence to your application. Now, I want to give you a good idea of the types of questions that you can expect. And so I created a list of those questions based on my own experience and, based on the breadth of the extent that those questions could go. So you can go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and post these questions. Go ahead, check those questions out. The link is going to be below. in the right below the video in the comment section. Click on that link to review those questions and go over those questions with your spouse. Now, I want to touch on this, right? In the worst case scenario is you, after the interview, the officer sends a notice of intent to deny. That notice of intent to deny is not an official denial yet. But what it is that that notice is going to indicate the reasons for the denial. And if they have not, if there are incidents during the interview or inconsistencies during the interview that led the officer to determine that they will deny your application, you have about 30 days. Right now, 30 days, there is an automatic extension of 60 days, but normally it's 30 days or 33 days if it's sent by mail. After you have received this notice, you have to respond. So you have time to respond, and it's your last chance to prove to the immigration officer that your marriage is bona fide, and to provide any kind of new evidence, or even to dispute what the officer's conclusions are based on what they've put in the notice. But this is going to be very fact specific. So if you have an issue like that, jump on it, treat it urgently, get legal representation so that the attorney can respond to it. This is how I help my clients. I do help them to respond to notice of intent to deny, to sway the officer, and to get an approval instead. So it's your last chance to do that. Now, what if you get denied? What if you never even received a notice of intent to deny? What if you just got a straight denial? There is an opportunity to have it reconsidered or reopened, just depending, and that's going to come down to the facts here. Or there is also the ability to reapply if you and which one you choose, whether you appeal or you go ahead and reapply, is going to depend on how much sense does it make. For example, I do have couples that come to me beyond the deadline to apply, and at that point it just makes more sense to apply. If there's reapply, if there's a blatant mistake of the officer that calls for an appeal, then that may make more sense as long as we're still within the deadline to apply. So that's what I have for you today on the marriage-based green card interview. Go ahead, check out those questions, those sample questions that I have posted for you to review. And remember, don't underestimate this process. No matter how much you know your spouse or you think you know your spouse, make sure you sit down with them a few weeks before the interview and start going over the questions, start just being very aware of your environment and your routine and what even both of your wants in your marriage. If you need assistance, go ahead, give me a call. You can give me a call, or you can visit the website to schedule your own appointment. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that I can keep providing this great information to people like you who need it to be empowered through their immigration journey. Until next time, bye-bye.